On behalf of the Middle East Institute and the Arab Network at Singapore, we would like to welcome you to a public talk by our honorable guest speaker, Mr. Muhammad Bin-Dohry. But first, of course, to kick off today's event, I would like to invite MEI Director, Professor Ng Sing Ho, to say a few words. So.
Thank you everyone for coming. It's a great pleasure to see the Hadhrami diaspora here in full force. We have a very enthusiastic contingent of people of Hadhrami Arab descent. And so it's a great pleasure to have them here. At the Middle East Institute, one of our key objectives is to serve as a bridge between Asia and the Middle East. And we say that there have been long-standing connections between the Middle East and Asia coming through Singapore as one of the hubs. And the Hadhrami community in Singapore really is a living testimony to the depth and richness of this history. And they are, as you can see, very active today in the audience. And so welcome to all of you. It is a great pleasure to have Mr. Muhammad Bin-Dohry with us today. He's a chairman of the Hadhramaut Research Center. He has a lot of experience working first as the senior commercial officer at the British Embassy in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia from 1975 to 88. And in 1990, he joined the Saudi Embassy Commercial Office in London as the commercial consultant. He retired in 2010, which is maybe not good for Saudi or Britain, but very good for Hadhramaut, because he then had free time, became very involved in Hadhrami things. I think he's one of the most, I should say, active and energetic people in the Hadhrami diaspora. He started the Hadhrami diaspora website. It's www.hadhramidiaspora.com if you want to go. And he also founded the Hadhramaut International Schools in Mukalla in September 2014. I would say that it's probably much harder than founding a website, and perhaps he can tell you something about it. And the school is the first which teaches the IGCSE English school in Hadhramaut, which is O-levels, is it? O-levels. So in a way, it's resuscitating the sort of British education standards, which were kept alive and developed in Singapore, but fell apart in Yemen. He's also the chair of the board of trustees of the Hadhramaut Research Center in Mukalla, Yemen. And he writes very often on current political economic affairs. And he's involved in various international organizations and charities. Mr. Bin-Dohry will share with you his views on the humanitarian crisis in Yemen, a view from the south. I think we have a special opportunity to see someone who is, you could say, from the diaspora, has been very involved in the homeland. And I think that will give us a unique perspective on what is going on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Ho. Could I also now invite Ms. Farah Bahajaj from the Arab Network in Singapore to say a few words as well.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Directly translated, it means, may peace, mercy, and blessing of the Almighty be upon you. As mentioned, I'm Farah Bahajaj, a member of the Arab Network at Singapore. First of all, we would like to thank the MEI, Professor Ho particularly, and his team for hosting this event in joint collaboration with the Arab Network at Singapore, acronymed ANAS, ANAS for short. We and the MEI have had collaborative arrangements as far back as 2013, when MEI sponsored and supported ANA's cultural event and a fundraiser themed Layali al-Khair. Again, direct translation means a night of benevolence. Way back, a couple of years back, 3-4 years back. And this was followed by 2 successive talks also jointly hosted by the two organizations. We would also like to thank and welcome, as Professor Ho rightly said, the indefatigable Muhammad Bin-Dohry and his very supportive wife, the vivacious Fatma, back to Singapore, and for agreeing to speak today about the underreported Hadhrami crisis, humanitarian crisis in Yemen. NUS is a key organization supporting UNHCR's work in Yemen since the onset of the war in Yemen. Today, later on, you will see we'll be presenting a pledge letter which signifies the third installment or disbursement of our funds for the humanitarian crisis for Yemen. And our total contribution over the total three disbursements comes up to about Sing dollars 87,474. I would like to say it's commendable effort put in. Thank you. Through this effort, ladies and gentlemen, we hope to put a spotlight on the magnitude of the Yemen crisis and hopefully across the time to galvanize the desperately needed support for a humanitarian response that sadly remains critically underfunded. Now, a bit of a history of what NUS stands for. We were formed in 2011, the brainchild of two local Arab gentlemen, one of whom is an academic who goes by the name of Professor Farid Alatas. He's seated right there, some of you may know, and a local businessman by the name of Abu Bakr al-Sagaf. It started off with 8 founding members, and I'm pleased to say that over the years we have now increased to 11 members, all of whom are full-time professionals. We come from diverse backgrounds, some from academia, some from business and finance. The rest, besides these two gentlemen, are in the team, Khadija Alatas, Shahnaz Al-Sri, Yasmin Al-Junaid, Huda Al-Junaid, Noor Al-Sri, Gamar Al-Bahar, Nadia Al-Bahar, and Felicia Ailing, who can't be here. Maybe just if you could mind standing to be recognized. Come. Now, all of us members, our ancestry can be traced to our ancestral roots in Hadhramaut, Yemen. And mind you, though we come from diverse backgrounds, we are all united in one objective, to contribute back to our ancestral land. It is our passion to, like we say, pay it forward, and to continue in the acts of charity of our forefathers when they first arrived in Singapore in the 1800s. And that's the driving force for NUS volunteers. The group's mission is to actively and positively contribute to the community, both locally and internationally, and we are guided by our 5 C's, which is totally different from the Singaporeans' 5 C's. And I'm sure being Singaporeans, you know what they are, right? Car, credit card, cash, condo, and country club. However, NUS ideals are a unique set of values, 5 C's representing our country, Singapore, our community in Singapore and the wider aspect in the world, children, culture, and charity. Since our establishment, NUS has granted bursaries and educational awards to local students from both secondary, graduates, undergraduates, and postgraduate levels. We've provided zakat disbursements and food distribution to the needy in the local community. We provide financial support also to the Singapore Autism Center and to the Singapore Association of the Visually Handicapped. We also participated in the Back to School project for Syrian refugees in Kilis, Kilis, Turkey. We had the privilege to be invited, and we went on behalf of Arab Network Singapore. We've organized also cultural events to showcase Arab heritage and run social and cultural activities such as Zumba in the name of bringing diverse communities in Singapore together, and besides having fun, of course, through Zumbaing, also to fundraise for various beneficial causes. Now, looking ahead, we look forward to a long-standing working relationship with MEI for the common good of everybody. And for now, I think we'd like to thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your kind attention. But before I move on, at this juncture, I would like to call upon Professor Farid Al-Attas to come up and present our pledge letter to UNHCR's representative, Ms. Geraldine Ang. Please come forward. Thank you.
Don't worry, just a quick message from me. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First up, I would like to thank the Middle East Institute, in particular Professor Ho, for giving us this platform to renew our partnership between NUS, Arab Network of Singapore, and UNHCR. Mr. Muhammad is the expert, so I will not be very, I'll be just very brief. Yemen has endured over 2 years of conflict, and the result of that is what we see is one of the worst and largest humanitarian crises the world is facing at the moment. UNHCR has been in Yemen for over 30 years, and despite the prevailing conflict and insecurity, we've managed to actually access all conflict-affected governorates in Yemen, through either directly or through our network of partners, for which we are very, very grateful. To help us do this work, we are extremely grateful and indebted to partners like NUS. As Farah mentioned, they have now contributed to our work 3 times over. This is the 3rd time, making it over 87,000 Singapore dollars, which is a big sum for a very tiny group of volunteers who have professional lives, and they get together and they do this. So thank you. Lastly, I would like to say thank you to all of you for your interest in Yemen, in this topic. Please continue to keep the people of Yemen in your prayers. They and people all around the world now, we're looking at over 65.6 million people who are forced to flee from their homes. So we're living through one of the world's worst crises since World War II. So please keep them in your prayers, and thank you for your interest in Yemen. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ang. And now, of course, we have come to the main item of our event today, the public talk by Mr. Muhammad Bin-Dohry. Could I please invite Professor Ho as well as Muhammad Bin-Dohry up on stage for the talk? Thank you.
Sit down. Sit down, be relaxed. Once again, a great pleasure to have all of you here, and an honor to have Mr. Muhammad Bin-Dohry. I've given you a view of
distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed a great pleasure to be here amongst such a distinguished audience to talk to you on the current humanitarian crisis in Yemen. The topic of this talk, I'm sure, touches every caring heart in this audience and the globe as a whole. More so, those of us who are committed to Yemen. It is not possible to speak about the humanitarian crisis without getting involved into the politics of Yemen, which have resulted actually in this unfortunate situation for the Yemenis. The dire situation in the country is entangled into many human-created problems by Yemenis themselves. The country is essentially tribal and constructed in a way that it's leading to unresolved conflicts. The power-hungry elites are not able to comprehend what the country needs and will not relinquish their gains but tenaciously hold on at any cost. Yemenis have been in poverty for a long time, but this now is much more worse, and more recently sectarianism raised its ugly head. Many thought that the Arab Spring was going to bring about a change for the better. And we saw Yemen's uprising as indeed one of the other Arab states, including Libya, Tunisia, Egypt, obviously Iraq after its invasion. They are now far more unstable, and with the recent rather unexpected events in the Gulf, we see the GCC dismantling itself, and a scenario of uncertainty is unfolding in front of our own eyes. Yemen has suffered from a dictatorial, corrupt leadership for 33 years and has been at war on many occasions between the North and the South, which took place in 1972, 1978, 1979, and an invasion of the South in 1994 to impose the ruptured unity between the North and the South. In addition to 6 wars that took place in the North between the regime of Ali Abdullah Saleh and the Houthis, a Zaydi Shia sect based in Sa'da in North Yemen. However, the fabric of the society in the North, regardless of their differences, suddenly closed rank to control Yemen, and a major war broke out in March 2015 and still remains going on. And we are now past the 2-year period. We are almost 2.5 years, and with no sight of a breakthrough. This fraternity earlier had toppled the recognized government, or what is called the legitimate government of President Abdul Rabbu Mansour Hadi, which is now based in Riyadh, and who fled out of Sana'a and exiled to Saudi Arabia with most of his government apparatus. A coalition of Arab and Muslim states led by Saudi Arabia and the UAE was formed to get the legitimate government back into power in accordance with the UN Security Council Resolution 2216, which states imposing sanctions on individuals who were undermining the stability of Yemen. The Security Council today demands that all parties in the embattled country, in particular the Houthis, immediately and unconditionally end violence and refrain from further unilateral actions that threaten the political transition. As the international community attempted political solutions by trying to bring the warring parties to cease hostilities, those who were and are fighting for control and power led the country into deeper turmoil. And it is the ordinary people, and I repeat again, it is the ordinary people who came to suffer extensively. Lack of food, hunger, high infant mortality, very poor sanitation, lack of basic medical facilities, exceedingly harsh water and electricity rationing, and the lack of basic human necessities of life. All are compounded with an ongoing war of wanton destruction in both the north and the south. The suffering of Yemen and its peoples is great and difficult to comprehend. After the failure of the 8 to 10 months of the National Dialogue Conference, which Dr. Sa'd bin Talib was amongst those who attended it in Sana'a, the many mediations, meetings with the warring parties, and the full involvement of the UN and others, the Yemenis could not agree on their destiny, and calls for independence by the South to break up from the unity government were loud and clear. It now looks like the unity between the North and South, formed in 1990, is coming to an end imminently. All these are factors of disillusion, and facts that have befallen Yemen. On 30th May 2017, which is this year, at the beginning of the holy month, the fasting month of Ramadan, the special envoy of the UN Secretary General for Yemen, Ismail Old-Sheikh Ahmed, gave a briefing to the open session of the UN Security Council, in which he said that 7 million Yemenis are at risk of famine unless this conflict ends. A quarter of Yemenis cannot afford food on the local market. Half of Yemen's population lacks access to clean water, sanitation, and hygiene services, all which increase the risk of infectious diseases. The latest outbreak of cholera is reported to have led to more than 500 deaths. This is old story. It's now gone over that amount by 3 times, or it's over 2,000. And over 60,000 suspected cases, which is now over 300,000. And this is all in the 19 governorates of the whole country. The rapid spread of the disease has been worsened by the inadequate healthcare system. At best of times, let alone war, accurate statistics are hard to come by, but the available figures talk about 60,000 or more suspected cases. I will update you on the recent statistics as I have been away for about 6 weeks from London. Yemenis are not only dying from violence, but from the lack of their essential salaries and the lack of the means for their livelihoods. UNICEF, which is on the ground in Yemen, working round the clock to protect children, says since the start of this crisis, we have helped to provide 4 million people with clean water, vaccinations, and they have vaccinated nearly 4.6 million children against polio and treated 23,000 children for acute severe cases. The coordinator of the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, OCHA, Mr. Jamie McGoldrick, stated recently that the malnutrition and cholera are interconnected. Weakened and hungry people are more likely to contract cholera. There are 17 million people who are food insecure, including 462,000 children in the grip of acute malnutrition. Yemen faces the possibility of famine, and over 100,000 people are estimated to be at risk of contracting cholera. From Geneva on the 25th of April 2017, MSF, the French doctors worldwide, with medical teams working across Yemen, say that they witness on a daily basis the reality of the humanitarian crisis facing its people in more than 2 years since the armed conflict escalated. Thousands of people have been injured, maimed, and killed. Our teams have treated more than 60,800 trauma patients, including war wounded and other violence-related injuries. Our patients have been shelled while preparing lunch in their kitchens, wounded by airstrikes, while walking to their fields, maimed by landmines, while herding their livestock, and shot by snipers in the streets outside their homes. Millions of people across Yemen are in critical need of aid in order to survive in a country where the economy has largely collapsed, basic services struggle to function, and social safety nets are strained. Many of the parties, or the patients, that are being treated and their families by the medical staff with whom they work with have lost their livelihoods and face illnesses, rising prices, shortages of essentials including food, fuel, electricity. Civil servants, including medical staff, have received no salaries for months. Clean water, decent sanitation, and basic hygiene items are often unavailable. Massive numbers of people have to leave their homes because of the violence, with many families forced to settle in overcrowded, unsafe locations. Nearly 20 international non-governmental organizations, NGOs, trying to help in Yemen made the following statement: the conflict in Yemen has led to a fast-moving and complex emergency. Over 1.2 million individuals have been internally displaced. 4,000 have been killed and upwards, and over 19,000 injured, and over 80% of Yemenis are in need of humanitarian assistance. In response, the Interagency Standing Committee has categorized Yemen a level 3 emergency. I'm sure the representative here might wish to expand on that. Yet, as grave as the situation is today, without proactive and strong measures, conditions will spiral deeper into widespread violent conflict and humanitarian need. Additionally, there are many more local NGOs operating throughout the country. We all have a part to do, something small as it may seem, but will make a difference for many. Ladies and gentlemen, my personal experience for the past 6 years or so was to reach out to the Hadhrami diaspora to try and get some kind of medical aid to Hadhramaut, our ancestral homeland. The reason being with so many visits to Mukalla and other parts of Hadhramaut, I saw the need and the suffering of those who could not afford medication. I visited many local NGOs, clinics, hospitals, and tried to see what they needed most, and offering whatever we could in terms of medicine from the diaspora. I was drawn by some who I genuinely felt were dedicated to the community and operated with meager means, and their support came from people like those in NUS, in East Africa, in parts of the Middle East like Dubai and Saudi Arabia. Our small contributions, including from friends in Singapore, Kenya, Saudi Arabia, Dubai, and the UK, made a lot of difference, and we were able to buy medicines locally and medical equipment as well. And these were distributed to NGOs within the country, I mean Hadhramaut, and the clinics. The medicine we provided was for free to the poor and the needy patients throughout Hadhramaut, including places like Mukalla, As-Som, Sah, Tarim, Al-Qatn, Al-Ghail, and so on. We had a collection point in Jeddah for medicine, contributed by Hadramis there, and sent overland back to Mukalla. This was all done by a team of 3 individuals on behalf of many in the diaspora. And I wouldn't say that we got our fundings from the big shots, but this was from simple individuals who are employees, but they responded to the call. We were trying to reach out to some of our fellow Yemenis in Al-Mahrah, Aden, and were about to continue more actively in those areas. And others had it not been for the Yemeni turmoil. I reached out to doctors worldwide in Turkey to assist with medical camps for Hadhramaut and Al-Mahrah. But again, this initiative could not go ahead because of the security situation in the country. And as I speak, last week I had the DWW team from Turkey visit Aden at my insistence, and they were planning to go to Hadhramaut. They could not get a flight into the country and were stranded in Cairo for some time, and eventually they got into Aden. However, they could not proceed to Hadhramaut because of the insecurity. They couldn't even get out of Aden. This is about 4 or 5 days back. I've been in correspondence with them while I've been in Southeast Asia. They had to be evacuated by a UN aircraft, I think, which normally goes to Aden. In fairness, Hadhramaut has managed over the years to survive on income from the diaspora, and more so from family members working in the Gulf and elsewhere who contributed generously to their families. Most of their friends also would contribute to have them sent out for treatment, like to Cairo or to Jordan or India. My other involvement in Hadhramaut was to establish, as Professor Ho mentioned, an IGCSE English system of education, the first of its kind in Hadhramaut, and this was done in 2014. We officially opened the school on the 2nd of September, where Dr. Sa'aduddin was one of the guest of honors to that inauguration of the school. It was an overwhelming situation because being the first school of its kind, and it was a private school supported by 2 local investors, we managed to enroll 380 students at one go. After finishing that, I left Yemen in February 2015, and immediately after that, the war broke out in March. I haven't been back since then. The other project we established was with Professor Abdullah Bujra and Nahdi, was the Hadhramaut Research Center, which I've been speaking to Professor Ho about, which was in association with the Al-Ahqaf University in Mukalla. And this was done at the same time. We inaugurated it in December 2013 and had our first academic conference as a result of that in London. This conference was supported, and I had the participation of 12 international academics who came out and presented their papers during that conference, and resulted in April this year to the publication of the Hadhramaut and its diaspora, Yemeni politics, identity, and migration. It covers Southeast Asia as well, East Africa, and these are papers presented by professors, Europeans, who actually did a lot of research on Hadhramaut. The book has been edited by a colleague and a friend, Dr. Noel Brehoni, and published recently in London. As I said, we launched it in April this year. A copy, I think, is with Professor Ho and Farid Al-Attas and my friend Dr. Saad al-Din. Coming back to the cholera epidemic, the epidemic is actually sweeping across the country. By mid-July, the cases that are believed to have died are 1,790. And about 350,000 or possibly more are suspected of being infected, which means in every 90 Yemenis, one is affected. It is also believed that most of the cases affected by the disease are in Sana'a, the port city of Hodeidah, and Taiz. The ICRC, International Committee of the Red Cross, have documented what they have witnessed, including the overcrowded health facilities. The BBC has also this week been giving a wider coverage on what is going on and faces Yemeni in this spiraling cholera epidemic. The economic crisis triggered by the war had made matters worse. Inflation has pushed prices of food, medicines, and most essentials very high, while most employees have not been paid their salaries, as there is no government actually functioning. The government stays in Riyadh, or the legitimate and quote-unquote government which functions only from Riyadh in five-star hotels and so on, has not been able to do anything to improve the situation over 2.5 years. This has also compounded the public services, which are almost halted. There are no services functioning. There are no airports functioning. Electricity, water has been in crisis. Supplies have been greatly stalled, and the sewer system in most of the cities and towns have ceased working. And this compounded the cholera crisis. Finally, I would definitely like to personally thank NUS and the Middle East Institute for having me with this distinguished audience, and I'll be more than happy to answer to any questions that you may wish to raise. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bin-Dohry, for giving us this, I should say, dire and bleak and realistic view of what's going on in Yemen. I think, of course, a lot of it has to do with politics, and in the realm of politics, many of us are unable to do very much.
Yeah.
But I think that there is room for doing things aside from politics, and I think you see today you've heard some of the efforts that are going on. At the Middle East Institute, we've started a series of discussions on reconstruction. The idea being that you cannot wait for the war to end before starting reconstruction, because really the wars keep going on in the Middle East. And as we are seeing in Yemen today, by the time the war stops, a lot of the population may have died. So you're not talking about anything very useful to think of reconstruction after that. So one of the ideas we've been playing around with is to think about how one can think about reconstruction even before wars stop. So whether, for example, one example being, say, Lebanon, where you had a civil war from 1975, and it stopped at some point in which people, you could say, went from competing over destroying buildings to competing over building buildings. And so this is one issue which we are very keen on, because in Lebanon, the warring parties never went away. They kept their arms, and they are still there, and they're still rivals with each other. At some point, they were able to turn the dynamic from a negative one into, in a sense, a positive one. So we're looking for these sorts of things. There are some things which are maybe configurational, which may have to do with a certain set of actors and their interests. If you can think of some way in which their interests come together over business, profit, reconstruction, rather than division, then perhaps this sort of thing might happen. I don't know. These are some of the things we're talking about, and we've been having a series of seminars going through various countries, Lebanon, Palestine, Qatar as a country involved in reconstruction. We'll have on Iraq and so on and so forth. We've had on Yemen also. So these are some of the things circulating around in the MEI. And I hope that those of you in Singapore who are interested will come to these seminars and also contribute your ideas and also ideas for practical things. So the floor is open for questions. Dr. Farid.
I'm of course interested in the political dimension of all of this, but I'd like to know to what extent are Hadramis or others in Saudi Arabia able to help with the humanitarian crisis, and to what extent are they left alone or helped or blocked by the Saudi government?
Well, their affiliation, obviously, being Hadhrami, Saudis of Hadhrami extraction, limits their movements towards openly funding or helping in any way. The Saudis have the King Salman Foundation, which has been sending aid to all parts of Yemen, in spite of the political differences and the ongoing war. It is all in the press, it is all in the papers. However, the Hadramis, I would say some of them, have been in their own way helping the homeland in one way or another. But they cannot come out openly. That much I know. I think it applies to most of those in the diaspora. So you have to do it quietly without arousing any eyebrows. I hope it answers your...
So the channels are open, in other words. It's not difficult to...
You can always find a way. There are always loopholes. Like I found a way of sending some medication from Saudi Arabia in the past, because there is a road transport. So we did, in our own small way, but we did get eventually medication into the country, and most of it we would buy locally, but that was before the war. During the war, we have problems. The logistics are difficult. I even contacted MSF in Aden, where they were still operating, and they told me, we don't have logistics to move medicines from Aden to any other area. We can't even get it into Aden easily. So they also left the country.
Just my second question. You gave many statistics, and we have also read in the press, on social media,
Sure.
many statistics, concerning all kinds of problems in medical area and health and so on and so forth. But to what extent do these apply to Hadhramaut itself? I mean, the news that we have is mainly about the north, and if it's about the south, it's about Aden. But what about Hadhramaut itself?
Hadhramaut, so far, as I mentioned in my talk, so far has come out as being the safest. In fact, it received many from Aden when the war broke out. And they housed them, they looked after them, and same from people from Taiz, they were welcomed. But again, they were dragged into this war. But it is much safer than any part of Yemen.
Lady in the back.
Hi, Mr. Muhammad. My name is Lauren. I'm actually the local representative of Doctors Without Borders, MSF. And I would like to say that you're absolutely right. This is actually very difficult logistically to bring in supplies. But actually, I'd like to clarify that MSF is still working in Yemen. We have 9 cholera treatment centers running, and we are supporting 30 over hospitals across the country in 11 governorates, as well as our own structures. So we are definitely still on the ground and providing public health support to the local population. Thank you.
But they did leave Aden at one time.
I believe there was an incident that caused them to withdraw. I have to check the facts, but I believe they are now back. They are now running.
They withdrew,
Yes.
and I have correspondence from them, from their offices in London, and they put me in touch with somebody who was in Aden and was back, who told me about the logistic problem.
You're absolutely right. Of course, the situation is constantly evolving.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that when you had that feedback, it was probably correct at that time.
That was way back, during the beginning of the war or in between, not recent.
Yes.
I did hear that they went back recently.
Yes, and we are definitely on the ground and supporting
Yeah.
as much as we can.
Sure.
It's actually one of our largest projects worldwide currently. Thank you.
Could I ask Lauren from MSF, what are the constraints you are facing? We've heard that there are, I don't know, 350,000 cases. What would it take for MSF to reach and help treat these cases? Is it a political, military, roads? What are the bottlenecks?
I think in any war and conflict zone, there are always logistical difficulties because of the situation on the ground. And of course, there will be political pressures that we have to navigate. Whenever MSF is on the ground, we tend to have already worked out an agreement with the local Ministry of Health before we intervene. That's how we believe that we are able to have the best and most stable programs on the ground. In terms of Yemen, we do have cooperations with certain parts of the Ministry of Health. I can't really go into details right now because it's quite complicated. As I mentioned, we're supporting 30 over hospitals, and then we also run our own hospitals, 13 of them on the ground, I believe, at current count. The difficulties we face on the ground obviously are logistical, but when it comes to MSF, because we have 40 over years experience dealing with medical and humanitarian aid on the ground in over 70 over countries, we have a very strong logistical background. And we actually have the know-how and the knowledge as to how to deliver such aid to the ground effectively and safely. So speaking for MSF itself, we are definitely no strangers to providing medical aid on the ground in war and conflict zones. And as I mentioned, in Yemen, we have about 1,600 staff working currently, of which only 100 are expats. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Saad.
Hello, I'm Saaduddin Talib. We welcome Muhammad back again in Singapore, and I must say that Muhammad has been a long-standing friend of mine for like almost a decade, and he's one of the most committed people to actually extending a helping hand whenever he can. That I must say before what I need to say. When we talk about as Mr. Bin-Dohry said, the humanitarian crisis of Yemen is actually made by the Yemenis or made by the elites. And it is a result of a real serious power struggle, which is not only political, but it also, I think, has to do a lot with deep-rooted cultural issues that separate. In other words, to put it simply, some people think it's their inherent right to rule the others. And that's why the Arab Spring has come and tried to change that. Now, as we say that the humanitarian crisis is a result of this political struggle, a lot of efforts are tried by international organizations, by communities from different parts of the world, and to try in the hope that some resolution or some relief will come on the political front. So we are facing basically two tracks. One of them is damaging the other. This political crisis and the conflict, the war, is actually damaging the pillars of stability in the communities in different parts of Yemen, and the degree of affecting is according to the nearness or distance from the actual war. But everybody is definitely affected. What is more affected also, I describe, is the collapse of the different aspects of government. One of them is the logistical part, which is basically like one of them is the banking system. And the second thing, as Mr. Muhammad said, how do you get aid through without having a banking system? And this is one of the things that was faced here even by the community in Singapore, by simply transferring even normal family assistance. It raises a lot of questions just by the hint that it is being transferred to Yemen. So that's a big issue that causes also a lot of hardships. And this is, I'm talking from my own family experience. So just getting even small amounts of money like $1,000, $2,000 is a big matter. That's one part. So what I'm trying to raise here or put a spotlight on is that there is a continuous deterioration of these elements of, I would say, state, which is a banking system, a government, security, never mind the services. The services are even deteriorating at that level. All we could do as a community abroad is not to give up and continue in whatever small way we can, as the NUS is attempting in many ways. There's also there's a very big effort and a very commendable effort by the Arab Association of Singapore as well, in also collaboration with UNDP in trying to also resolve some of these matters. But what I'm trying to say is, I mean, the Arab Association at least is in the process now of providing solar power to schools, because in this summer, many of the students have stopped going to school because they simply cannot take the heat. You cannot go to a room at 45 degrees centigrade without a fan working. So we are attempting, we are doing about 6 or 7 schools in Hadhramaut, in Wadi Hadhramaut especially, for these according to the amounts of available funds that are. But I'm just, again, saying that there is a race between the efforts that are being put and the difficulties that are being faced, whether by, I'll just speak up, whether by the law, whether by normal people or by international organizations. These logistical problems. Let me just highlight this by one small incident that I heard. Okay. One small incident, maybe this will put some understanding to the matter. I believe it was the Children's Fund, UN Children's Fund. They were bringing in some polio vaccines. And of course, they were flying them into Sana'a by planes. And I heard firsthand that, okay, one of the warring parties in control of Sana'a said, no, you can't immunize our children until you give us medicines to our soldiers. You know, but we are a children's fund. But warring people have lost this logic, you know. No, my soldiers need medicines. If you don't bring medicines for the soldiers, then you cannot immunize. And eventually, the children were left unimmunized because of these logistical things that war and its nature has brought to. This adds another angle. I know there is very little that can be done by us as different communities scattered around the world, but at least our awareness of this aspect of war and conflict and what it brings and what kind of culture it leaves behind is very important. But the last thing I want to say is there is, I think, some value that can be gained by creating islands of relief in some places. And I think Aden was supposed to be that example, but I think it has failed to some extent, as Mr. Bin-Dohry said. And I think Hadhramaut may present that what is the rewards of peace. And that's why we cannot wait until this conflict is over, but we can create islands of relief from this conflict. And if we can succeed in any place, however small it is, whether it is Socotra, whether it is Hadhramaut, or even Mahrah, I think that will shed a lot of hope on the rest of Yemen. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you for your talk. I wonder if I could, I'm Toby Dodge from the London School of Economics. I wonder if I could draw you away from the specific humanitarian focus and ask you to comment or to detail where the United Nations attempts to broker peace in the civil war are at the moment. Thanks.
It's more a political question, which...
Everything is open.
Well, the situation stays stagnant as it started. I don't think there has been any movement as far as the warring parties are concerned. We have seen meetings taking place in Kuwait, in Geneva, in Sana'a, in Saudi Arabia. Nothing has moved. More than 2.5 years. From the days of the NDC, which I personally had very little confidence that it will achieve anything, and which turned out to be true. The warring parties, everybody is just interested in taking power and distributing posts to their own cronies, and that is all Yemeni politics.
Yes, please.
My name is Gada. I'm from NUS, from Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences. I just wonder about the role that the Arab League is playing in solving this crisis. Thank you so much.
Tough one again. The Arab League is toothless, I would say. To me, the Arab League is toothless. They haven't solved any problem, as far as I know, in the Arab world. If not, they've compounded most of the problems. So the Yemeni side of events or solution will not be resolved by, if the Yemenis themselves don't come head to head and agree, I can't see a way forward.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Omar Al-Attas. Mr. Muhammad, whilst the efforts at the medical level, educational level, and a variety of other levels are laudable and required, my reading is that it is incremental and sporadic. The question I have is this: if you are to pick 3 things that you want to have happen that will drastically change the fundamentals on the ground and institutionalize changes and bring about good things for Yemen, what would that be? And how realistic are those? Thank you.
I've always said education, education, education is the first priority. And then you have to educate the people. You have to educate them, whether they are old, middle-aged, young, infants, they should be educated. And that's why I set up that international school in Mokalla, because, as I said, it was the first of its kind in Hadhramaut. The second thing is healthcare. It's neglected. And it's controlled by a few who are selfish. Even if you send aid for foreign camps, doctors, I mean, like Doctors Worldwide, Turkey and so on, you get so much frustration within government, within officials. But you have to struggle and get your way through.
Lady in the middle.
Thank you, Mr. Muhammad. I'm Anisha. I study global studies in NUS. My question is, how much has been done to facilitate transport of people outside of Yemen, to be able to survive outside and then perhaps come back when the crisis is better?
Well, most of those who left had help from their own relatives, and they wouldn't go far afield because first, the Yemeni passports cannot get visas to any outside country. Until recently, Malaysia, maybe Kenya, but they have now stopped. Malaysia is starting to be more restrictive. This is I found out recently when I was in Malaysia. But Malaysia played a role. It left Yemenis to go into the country until this day. But those are being now restricted. Why? Arab countries, Egypt, Jordan, were open to all Yemenis. And all the people, they are the ones who offer medical treatment to Yemenis at not for free, but paid by Yemenis. And they have been restricted even to travel to those countries. So it's a catch-22 situation.
Even Somalia.
Somalia, yeah, there you are.
Mr. Bin-Dohry?
Yes. I like to endorse what Mr. Muhammad Dohry said. The key word is education. But education needs a big budget. Without that budget, nothing can be lifted off. And also, the curriculum in South Yemen is about 150 years old. There's never been overhauled or never been improved. And some places where they have education, like in Tarim, they actually have indoctrination, not education. It's a monologue, not a dialogue with the students. I've been to these places. But I want to correct one thing you said in your presentation, that the lack of sewage in the whole of Middle East have no sewage system, except in Cairo. There's one place called Heliopolis. That's the only place we have sewage. Hadhramaut, no sewage at all. And outside Aden is 100% no sewage at all. So, but we had starvation in Hadhramaut long time ago, when the Singaporeans rallied and helped them. But then it was reversed. But what we need is honest, sincere government to have budget, not for defense, to collect arms, but to have improvement. Somebody mentioned the Arab League. This problem is replicated in the whole of the Middle East. We have ourselves to blame. So I think maybe prayers can help, but I think initiative is more important. Thank you very much.
I agree with what you said. But the system, as you said, how can you change it? I changed it. When I started the IGCSE school,
But you had sponsors.
I didn't have sponsors. I had investors who wanted to put money.
Everything needs money.
Yeah, no, I never corrupted, and that was my no. And that was my first statement to those who were going to take my idea of an IGCSE school. I do not corrupt. Because they asked me to do everything. They will keep away. They don't want to be in the picture. I said, okay, fine. I will do it. But look, I don't corrupt. So if I get any government officials hindering, which they did, and he is witness of that, ask him. So we have to change things. If they don't change, we will change them.
But our situation is aggravated by this proxy war.
Well,
Don't blame the Yemenis 100%. Of course, the north is very backward. What we need to have is separation of the north from the south. Then we can
now we are getting into politics.
then we can see some light at the end of the tunnel.
We hope so.
gentleman, second row, and then.
My name is David White. I've lived here over 20 years, and from my accent, you can probably tell where I'm from.
Sure.
I think the U.S. is imploding before our eyes, but does the blind support that Trump gives to Saudi Arabia, is that damaging the situation? Or is that encouraging them? And I don't know what in the world anybody can do because Trump is just out of control. But okay, I'll stop. But ideally, what should the U.S. be trying to do here?
I think both those countries you mentioned, or the leaderships of those countries, are unfortunately not helping the situation but compounding it. Yemen is a poor country. Why should they want to bomb them? They just claim terrorism. Terrorism is everywhere.
Excuse me, I would like to correct one misconception here. Yemen is not a poor country. Yemen is a rich country. Yemen has the best marine products in the world, one of the best. But it has been robbed.
Yeah.
They're still robbing it. We have 100 trawlers from Japan and Korea stealing our fisheries, our tuna, our lobsters and all that. So the Navy is absent. We have Coast Guards. The Coast Guards can be corrupted with $1,000 only. I attended a conference in Singapore, in Mandarin Hotel. One Japanese said, "How long have you been in business?" I said, "All my life, and I've worked as an executive in the largest company in Aden." He said, "Your people can be corrupted with $1,000. So we are poor. And the best uranium in the world is from Yemen, from South Yemen, Hadhramaut, near Wadi Hagaf there. I would continue to say, we need, the world needs us, and we need the world all the time. So we are rich. We are rich. So when the British were there, I'm not trying to bless the colonialism, but they did a lot to develop artisan wells, agriculture. We have the best cotton export in the whole of the Middle East. In fact, we exceeded Cairo in the cotton export. And we have the best refinery. You know, you heard about it, the British refinery in Buraidah.
Aden, yeah.
Yeah, and we are the second bunkering after New York. How can you say we are poor? The port in Aden was deepened by the British. They spent millions of dollars.
The country is rich.
Yes, thank
but,
you.
But the government is corrupt. And for your information, you mentioned about fisheries.
Yes.
I was there during the socialist regime, and I served in capacity with the government and the Japanese.
Yes.
And we earned a lot of money for the government.
Yes. It was who can
no, the Japanese company and the government, we had a joint venture.
Yes.
And we employed even Yemenis into that company, 100 Yemenis as fishermen, supervisors, assistant supervisors, and so on, 100. And that was in a spell of 3 years because the Japanese were about to leave the country. But because there was a Hadhrami in the Ministry of Economy, managed to woo them, to get them back to the negotiating table, because the Fisheries Department, which was part of the Ministry of Agriculture, were corrupt, and they couldn't deal with them. So they were about to leave. Had it not been for the Hadhrami minister and permanent secretary bringing them back, they wouldn't have employed the 100 employees. They wouldn't have got the finances. We wouldn't have got even part of the fisheries that there are 3 fishing boats were in the waters. And so both parties were earning something. But after the unity, that's what you are talking about. It was robbed of its fisheries. You cannot get fisheries. You cannot get fish in Aden or Mukalla. You get it in Sana'a. And that is the situation, unfortunately.
Mr. Helmi bin Talib.
First of all, thank you very much for coming to Singapore, and
Thank you.
a warm welcome from all of us, and it's really great to see you here.
Thank you.
And it's a very enlightening speech. I think in terms of humanitarian aid, we probably did the maximum we can. I think NUS has its own effort, the Arab Association has its own effort. But obviously our resources are limited, and the reach will always be limited because the resources are limited. And I think the international organizations and the governments are more able to reach people, although we need always to do what we can, and hopefully we will continue to do what we can. But these efforts are not going to make a difference on the ground. We collectively, as a Hadhrami diaspora, need to think of some way to make a difference on the ground, if at least to our neighborhood, to Hadhramaut, to Mukalla, to Sehun, to Tarim. And that is something we really need to think about. What do we need to do to make a difference? This may sound like a political question, but I'm not trying to pose a political answer. Some of the answer may be political, but it's really more social, cultural type of answer where we can put pressure to have a conflict-free zone, like in some kind of areas. Maybe model a little bit on what they're doing in Syria. It's something that we collectively as a diaspora, not us alone in Singapore, not the people in Saudi Arabia alone, but collectively as a diaspora need to think about. Or I'm also happy to see what other comments from your experience on the ground that you see that we can collectively make a difference in an effort.
You will be pleased to know that both Saad and I are very much involved in bringing together diaspora. My initiative was 2010 when I established the Hadhrami diaspora website. It was to bring together all the Hadramis throughout the world to have a say in their own country, to participate in what was going on. And I predicted Yemen is going into a different direction, and very soon we will be lost as Hadhramaut, as for those in the homeland. For us, we, as somebody was telling me, not somebody, 2 or 3 of the biggest businessmen in East Africa, we are sultans where we are. Why do you care about Hadhramaut? So there you are. We are fighting 2 wars, within our own people and from within.
But I think that dynamic changes. If a dynamic takes place, people will think like that, change their mind. If a dynamic of
If we show that we can do something, like the school, like a healthcare center, like more schools, from our own initiatives, they will know that although the 2 investors I told you about were locals, local businessmen, but they had their own agenda, and my agenda was different from theirs. The agenda was, this is an investment. At the end of the day, we want to see our returns. And I point blankly told them, you won't get your returns initially. I mean, you won't get your capital back unless this school stands for 4 to 5 years, then you can start seeing the returns. If you are doing it for the community, but if you are doing it for business. And I could read from the others who were sitting with us, businessmen, big businessmen in Mukalla. From their body language, I could make out these people are just there to make money. They were not interested in education as education for their kids, for their future, for the future of the country. But 2 came out, but still they were businessmen, as I said.
Hi, my name is Abdullah. You mentioned that Saudi Arabia is giving aid to the Yemen, and my question is, what are the aid that is provided, and to what extent is it effective, given that they are also bombing indiscriminately and creating more problems?
Yeah, that's a complex question. They are bombing and they are at the same time offering aid to humanitarian aid to like medicine, like food, to all places of Yemen. And this is it's not news, it's always in the papers. Where it goes, how it is distributed is left to those on the ground, really. Whether it goes to the right people who deserve being helped or not. But I would blame both, because even internally, most of the aid is seen to be used for gaining money out of that aid for their own purpose, not for the people.
Prof. Sumanto and then Prof. Farid.
My name is Sumanto Al-Qurtubi. I originally from Indonesia, but I was educated in the US and teaching in Saudi Arabia in King Fahd University. So I have a lot of students from Yemen, from Hadhramaut also, and both from the north and from the south. And my university have a different policy regarding the Yemeni students. To those who from the south Yemen, the university forbid them to go home. So every year a student cannot go home, go to Yemen. But those come from the south of Yemen, university gives more flexibility. So the second point is I talked to many Yemeni students regarding the conflict in Yemen, and it seems to me there are different opinions, different points of view, even from Yemeni themselves. Some of them agree with the conflict, some of them against the conflict, and so on and so forth. It might be depend on their background, might be religious backgrounds, might be there. Some of them might be Sunni or Shi'i and so on and so forth. Because my university is there are Shi'i students also in King Fahd University. So my point is there are different points of view, different understanding and opinion about about the Yemeni crisis and conflict. And actually, my point question is not about my student. My point question is, I was wondering about Yemeni or Hadramis who live in Saudi. What exactly they do, and what their contribution to overcome the crisis in Yemen. Because as you know, you live in Saudi for many years, right? So you know there are many Yemenis, there are many Hadramis in Saudi. But I was wondering what exactly their role to overcome the crisis in Yemen. Do they approach the government, the kingdom? Do they try to manage to bridge or they?
I mentioned in my talk somewhere that those in Saudi Arabia who are Saudized, Hadhrami extraction, categorically say our allegiance is to Saudi Arabia first, and we don't want to be dragged into it. Whether they have an influence, I doubt, because their influence waned many years back now. Maybe I wrote a paper actually on Hadramis in Saudi Arabia back in 2012, I think, and it's Hadramis in Saudi Arabia. And I mentioned even these things, that the Hadrami influence, or the Hadramis in Saudi Arabia, had great influence at one time. But then this influence started getting, it went down. It went down by many through causes. But they did have an influence at one time. But over the years, I think that influence, especially now, it's probably, I wouldn't say nil, but they wouldn't make a difference to Saudi thinking.
So they are actually Saudi, not Yemeni.
Yeah, they are Saudi, like us. I'm British or Kenya, although I'm from Kenya. Like the others are from Singapore, they're Singaporeans. Then we only do it because it's our ancestral home. And we try to make a difference, like Obama said. And we will.
Prof. Farid?
To the issue of the diaspora. Because Helmi was talking about the role of the diaspora. I think it's an important idea, but we have to also be realistic to realize that the Hadhrami diaspora is a weak diaspora. It's not like the Tamil, Sri Lankan Tamil diaspora. It's not like the Sikh diaspora abroad or so many other diasporas which are very well organized and united, across the borders of their own countries. We are a weak diaspora, and for 20, 25 years, 30 years, we've been talking about international Hadhrami conferences, bringing people from different parts, from East Africa, from India, from Southeast Asia together. We've not really even managed to do that, let alone just at an academic level, let alone bringing people together from the diaspora to deal with the crisis in Yemen. I think there is some merit to working on that, though. I think I've been pessimistic about this whole process in the last decades, but we still nevertheless need to do that. I speak to, Dr. Sumanto was talking about Hadramis, Yemenis in Saudi Arabia. So I have some contact with Yemeni students in Kuala Lumpur. We've got tens of thousands of Yemenis in Malaysia, and many of them are students. And just as in Saudi Arabia, they are in different groups, but the ones I speak to are an intra-religious group. They are Zaidis and Sunnis from the north, as well as Sunnis from the south. And they have an interest in bringing Yemenis together. But the problem is that such an effort will only work if, for example, in the case of Malaysia, Yemeni students and other Yemenis have good contact with Hadhrami Malaysians, but even that is not going to come, will not have any impact unless the diaspora in Malaysia has some clout. And that's, I think, one of the problems of the Hadhrami diaspora. It has no clout in their own countries. In Malaysia, we have no clout. Maybe in Indonesia, to some extent, there is some clout, and in some other countries, there may be some clout. But in general, there isn't any clout. So we can say, yes, in the abstract, the diaspora is international. We are in all countries throughout the Indian Ocean, and what can we do we need to do something to intervene. But how can we actually practically do that is something that needs to be thought out very carefully and then executed. In the case of in my case, because I happen to have some contacts and so on. So these Yemenis, this was 2 years ago, and I think they were a bit naive, these students in Malaysia. They said, we need to get the Saudis and the Iranians to talk to each other to stop the war or to de-escalate the war. And then they thought Dr. Mahathir could do something about that. So they were discussing with me, can we meet Mahathir and can he help, how can he help, and so on and so forth. Eventually I heard that they had met him. But I told them myself that he will not be able to do anything, because this is not a question of the Saudis and the Iranians not having good contact with each other. And if we could get them, somebody could get them together, they would be able to resolve their differences. And now we have seen that they are even further apart than ever. So stopping the war is, as Professor Ho was saying, is not, the political aspect is not something that we can actually think about and have any impact on. But at least in terms of putting pressure through the diaspora on our respective governments, for example, on the Singapore government, on the Malaysian government, on the Indonesian government, in those. In Kerala, we were discussing Kerala. In India, at least in the state of Kerala, Hadramis have more clout, certainly than they have in Singapore or in Malaysia. But in countries where they have more clout, and in countries where they have less clout, the issue is really, if we want to think of the role of the diaspora, is what can we do working with Yemenis, in countries where Yemenis are residing, like in Malaysia, to put pressure on our governments to to intervene in some way or the other, whether it's particularly in the areas of education and humanitarian aid.
Well, I think Singapore did host a rihla, I think, some long time ago, I think. And there was another one on Hadramis in London, I think in the 90s, if I'm not mistaken. Malaysia.
I think the conferences have been put together.
Yeah, and I did call for, if you remember, on my last trip about 8 years ago to Singapore, I spoke to you, I spoke to Saad about a conference. Unfortunately, there was no, I think it also depends on funding, which is, again, I think it is hereditary in the Hadhrami communities everywhere. They wouldn't want to sponsor. I experienced that firsthand in 2015 when I called for an academic conference in London, and none of my Hadhrami rich elite who knew about what I was doing, and I asked them physically, in writing, inshallah, and nothing happens. Well, there are then also there are those who promote Mawlids, yes, I know, and there are those who don't. So it's a conflict.
I think maybe
of ideas.
If I can contribute something, I mean, maybe as a question for Mr. Bin-Dohry, but also for members of the audience. And I would like to say this, speaking of conferences and what a diaspora can do, I'm thinking of the Singapore conference in 1927.
Exactly, goes back, yeah.
Singapore conference in 1927 was the point in which Singapore was linked to Hadhramaut. Both were under, well, Hadhramaut was not under the British at that time. Singapore was under the British. And of course, that conference was entangled with differences between Alawis and Irshadis, people who like Mawlids
They are
against Mawlids. But if you take the lesson from there, is that I think the diaspora had an impact when it worked together with a state, and that state was the British Empire. So Mr. Ingrams, who went to Malaya, Singapore, got ideas from the diaspora, and also got commitments from the diaspora. He went to Hadhramaut, and he claimed he made a truce with 2,000 tribes. So at that time, like now, Yemen is at war, all the tribes are at war with each other, you have further conflict, endless divisions. What happened was Ingrams came in and said, I was able to make treaties between 2,000 tribes, and I got the whole thing solved. We had a federation of Hadhramaut and so on. So that was Ingram's story. Well, behind that story also is a story of Abu Bakr bin Sheikh Al-Kaf with money from Singapore. He tried to build a road from Hadhramaut to the coast and hooking up with Singapore. And he, as he built that road, actually made treaties with about 1,400 groups. And there are we have those documents actually sitting in, say, right now in tin boxes, actually. But what I'm saying is that the diaspora was able to do something when its interests aligned with the state, and when you were able to align both. Now, today, I think there actually is a situation where diasporic Hadramis are working with a state. And that state is UAE, especially the Abu Dhabi government. So the UAE, as some of you know, has been very active in Hadhramaut. And I believe they've been active with Hadramis who have come in as UAE citizens, as officers in something called Nukhba, which has a military force of UAE officers, some of them Hadramis, together with local Hadrami fighters. And essentially they have, I think, stabilized Hadhramaut, the Nukhba. And my friends in Hadhramaut say that they can operate quite well. Things are settled, at least compared to Aden and especially the north. So I think here you have one instance where something like what Professor Farid was asking for actually is taking place. Now, I'll throw out this question to the larger group. Is it possible, for example, to think of this Hadhrami situation in terms of then making a political push to say that we have achieved something, limited, but something together with Abu Dhabi or UAE, together with Hadramis who have settled in Abu Dhabi and come back as military officials, and that we want to extend this to the whole South. We'll say that we will ask for a separate state in the South, and when we have a separate state in the South, the question of who is the legitimate government of Yemen will be suspended, because now we have a separate state. So whether it is Abdul Mansur Hadi or Ali Abdullah Saleh, that is not our issue. We have our own state. We are in partnership with UAE. That's one thing. Where the North is concerned now, it's a question of Saudi, Houthis, Ali Abdullah Saleh, Iran. That's a separate issue. So perhaps then, if you approach the problem in this way, you're making one big complicated problem into two smaller problems. The southern one is in a way clearer. The northern one is not as settled, but in a way it is also clear, because if you think about it, who is actually running North Yemen? It is a person who has been running it for the past 30, 40 years, Ali Abdullah Saleh. That is a fact on the ground. And if that is a fact on the ground, that is not being acknowledged because the official government is a government which claims to represent both South and North. So if you say you are separate, you are actually splitting off a complicated problem into two separate problems, making each one more possible to be solved. Just floating that as for discussion.
That's, I don't know, we have politicians here. But personally, if the solution is that the South breaks, and we come under the influence of Abu Dhabi, I wouldn't for one moment agree to that.
I agree. You wouldn't agree to that?
No.
We will be colonized.
It's a new colony.
In fact, Saudi Arabia already uttered that the aim of UAE is to colonize Hadhramaut and the South. They already said it.
What a big question. Okay. On the ground today, there is a clear separation between the North and the South. Yes. In the hearts and minds of people of the South, there is a clear separation in the hearts and minds that they don't foresee that they will go back under that dictatorship again.
Okay, for the simple reason, now in Sana'a we don't have now one dictator, we have two dictators. One is Ali Abdullah Saleh, and the other is even worse, which is Al-Houthi, which is a sectarian dictatorship, which most people, most normally minded people would be appalled by the language and the thoughts and the agenda of the Houthis. It is to them it's a clear set that we are Masir of the Quran, you know, we are directed by God to carry out this function of ruling the others. And I have there's very hard evidence, which I have in my phone, of Al-Houthi saying, the north is ours, and the south we will take it by every last living man in the north. And we will, and the army is mine. This is all ours, you know. That's Abdul Malik al-Houthi, who is now the Ayatollah of this Al-Houthi movement. So, you expect not even the South. The South, oh, hang on, you know, what is happening? So, but what is the obstacle to that? I understand that's what made the Saudis, oh my God, are we going to have this kind of sectarian rule in here on Iran on one side and also in Yemen in the south? Of course, it is to them an existential issue to go and fight. I understand what kind of, and that's why I said there is hardcore conflict. It's all about major directions or major mindsets of why he wants to run the country. Nobody talks about how we want development, we want good schools, we want good hospitals, we want good roads. This is all secondary. The primary question is, I want to run this place, and I want to run it the way I want. And that is, and to that matter, the people of the South, and to some areas of people in Taiz and Al-Qaeda, no, we can't have that. The South said, oh, we have been a state by ourselves until 1990, now why don't we regain the state? So what are the obstacles against that? Number one is the geopolitical situation, not only in the region, but also across the world. Should we allow Yemen to be divided again? And then you have UN Security Council questions saying Yemen is united, Yemen is united, Yemen is united, which now, today, spells fear in the hearts of people of Aden, people of Hadhramaut, people of, what do we give up our destiny again to be ruled for another 30, 40 years under such not only a dictatorship of money, as Ali Abdullah Saleh was running, but also a dictatorship of the mind and capture the minds and the hearts of basically a state capture of a different kind. So they want, yes, it's all about now how do we go about, and it's only for the first time this recently the Security Council said, oh, we now agree, finally we have to look at the situation of the South with the new eyes or the new vision for what we call a fair solution to the situation in the South. That is where most people get stuck. The diaspora gets stuck, the governments get stuck, Abu Dhabi gets stuck, Riyadh gets stuck, everybody. But yes, if you are practical, if you are pragmatic, this is not sustainable. The only sustainable way is for these two people to go their own ways. And okay, the North, if they feel it's nice that Al-Houthi runs the show, well, it's good for them. We will have this big, huge wall, like Trump said. With your mind or with your rubbish of human control. That is not. We are in 2017. People have now communicated in all sorts of communications. You know, you can't rule my mind that way. To tell you how it's done, this mindset, in 1945 or 1946, there was the Imam, who is the same sect as the Houthis, oh, we need a constitution. And he was running from his little walled city of Sana'a. So no, constitution is communism. You can't have a constitution. And he equated, and he dragged the man that this is the communist who the one who goes for a constitution. And they put him on a donkey, and they slaughtered him in the. Are we going to go back to that mindset? Just to ask for a simple human right, that you are considered a communist, you are considered this, they give you names, they give you labels, and because of the uneducated peoples, you can set your agenda as you wish. Therefore, yes, I agree that who is going to inject this medicine of pragmatism into this whole dialogue of resolving the Yemen situation? That is still, the Sheikh works in a very narrow, limited space where he can go beyond and say, oh, why don't we think about the two Yemens? Why don't you think even about three Yemens?
And I think perhaps there's one thing where the Singapore and other diasporas can play a role, because if we go back to the 1927 conference and the role of the Singaporeans, the issue there is not the type of government, but whether government works. And the Singaporean or Singaporean diaspora showed that in Singapore it worked for them, and in fact I think the Singapore diaspora had a role in the colonization of Hadhramaut by the British, simply because it was a demonstration of what works. And so that what works was brought into Hadhramaut, and therefore you had cars shipped in from Singapore, taken apart into bits and pieces, carried on camels, and reassembled in Seoul and so on. And this happened before Saudi Arabia had cars. Hadramis love to say that, but this is simply to say that you're bringing in what works to the place. Even though it's called istimar or colonialism, you don't care about the type of government, you care about the degree of government which works. And in the current situation, if you say that Abu Dhabi is coming in, it has settled some issues. There are in fact Hadramis who are coming in as UAE citizens. And if you can, with your solar projects, with your education projects and so on, you create these islands of things which are functioning, working, and so on, that would add credibility to then a political position saying, look, what we have is a working system, and we would like to consolidate it with political independence. Is that possible?
I just want to add on your point a little bit.
There is no political maturity in Hadhramaut or in the north.
I think
only in Aden. Aden has creative thinking, political maturity. I think you're getting confused. يعني الوعي السياسي ما فيش وعي ولا في حضرموت ولا في الشمال. في عدن بس.
Okay, maybe Singapore. We hear from
Singapore. Actually, what I want to say is that situation already exists on the ground for most of the coastal Hadhramaut, and to some extent in the interior, but the interior there's a huge military camp that's still run by the general in Saudi Arabia. What's his name? Ali Hussein. So the situation, although what you describe as a situation, but it's fragile. So in terms for us as a diaspora, the al-Kafs of today don't sit in Singapore or Indonesia, they sit in Saudi Arabia. The people like Rajhi and Bin Laden and so on. So we don't have that amount of influence as what we did, 100 years ago or 90 years ago. So if any weight is going to be brought on the ground from the diaspora, it has to be from Saudi Arabia. And the moment we bring politics into the equation, they're out of it, because Saudi has its own interest, and then they have to follow that. What I had in mind was more of a political type of scenario. The politics on the ground is already more or less taking shape, as far as Hadhramaut is concerned, for all of Yemen. So is there a collective role where we can play to support the situation at hand in Hadhramaut? Because it is the only, or one of the stable parts of Yemen. You know, if we move on to that direction, the politics is beyond us, to be honest. But the influence on politics is there. And the other thing I want to say, although we are, what we may appear to be weak at this point in time, but crisis throws up leadership. And that's actually where we are weak. We don't have any leadership. That leadership must come from the people with heavyweight, and that's people from Saudi Arabia. So long as it's not political, and they have green lights from the government, and they'll only have green light if it's not political, they might be able to help. And it's not true to say that they are not helping. They're not getting involved in the politics, but on the economic or the social or the humanitarian aspects, they are getting involved. But the governments are not allowing them to go there because obviously if one of these heavyweights goes there, he can get kidnapped and the story gets out of hand. So they are, I don't think they are giving them a green light to go there yet, but they are helping on the ground actually in various ways through channels like Mr. Dohry says. So I don't think they're not there. Yeah. So I think they do through these quieter channels.
Yeah,
That's something we collectively need to think about. What aspects, what role can we play? What our role can only be a catalyst here in Singapore because we are a small community, or for that matter in the Far East. And there are a lot of examples in history actually, which is the Singapore Conference of 1927, and the state was very small, and they had access to the leadership in the state.
I think those in Saudi Arabia are playing a role, but they could have done much more.
They can, yeah.
Whether it is with government or in Hadhramaut itself.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they have been also divisive in certain instances.
They are.
And this should really be for people like us in the diaspora to come out openly and talk to them and tell them point blankly that they should take more active pro-action, not just sit around and they chat on their chat rooms or meet over a meal or whatever and then forget about everything. And that is what is happening now.
Farid? So I agree with Hadhrami. I think it's interesting to look seriously at what was done in 1927 and to see how far that can be replicated, but it won't be replicated in Singapore because the outcomes of the 1920s
are the bin Talibs.
We don't have outcomes.
Saudi Arabia.
The 2020s, we don't have these outcomes.
1927, they were collaborators.
But really, the thing is, there are things that we can do in Singapore and basically Indonesia, especially in Singapore and maybe even in Indonesia. I think we have the organizational ability to bring people together. In fact, we were discussing earlier on about over lunch about having this another conference, but which will bring East Africans and Southern Indian Hadramis together with South Asian Hadramis. I think we have that, and we need to also include the part of the Mahrah in Arabia itself, Saudi Arabia and Yemen and so on. I think we have the ability to organize and to perhaps, set some agenda and inspire and move some of these people. That much we can do. But certainly, we can't get involved in the politics because, for example, if we in Singapore are here to talk about intisar, to talk about, what do you call it? Separation, it won't fly. So it's a non-starter. We'll be in trouble with the government, with our government, the Singapore government. So we need to stay on the, whatever direction it takes in terms of politics is something that will happen. But whatever direction it takes, there are things in the areas of humanitarian aid and in the areas of education and establishing education institutions which have to go on, whatever the direction politics takes. And that's where we should be.
But, if I have a question, what if Hadramis in UAE say that we are for separatism and we have been involved in a project with the UAE state and we are actually building a strong society, what will be the response from diasporas elsewhere?
I think we talk more of the Hadramis in Saudi Arabia because they are the elite of all the Hadramis in the Gulf states. I don't know about the UAE, whether maybe, as you mentioned, maybe some of them have been enrolled in the army or whatever. But those are just simple employees or...
There's no heavyweight.
Yeah, no, well, I can mention so many names in Saudi Arabia who are heavyweights, I mean financially. But they need some push, proper push from people who with substance. And Farid's intervention about conference, yes, we spoke about a conference. I think it is right to have a collection of, including from Saudi Arabia and UAE, Hadramis to participate. But it needs a lot of work.
A conference is one thing. These people are not academically inclined. So
That's it, yeah.
Not really inclined towards conference. It's really sort of collections of meetings, and getting...
And then you get nowhere, like the Arab League.
Yeah. It's getting an idea across, and then whether it sells or not, whether it doesn't sell. They are not, I mean, a conference, if they do come, and more likely that these people will not really come to a conference, you get a lot of academics. If they do come, they just finish the conference and go home.
I asked one Hadhrami in Saudi Arabia, recently was here. I said, why don't you do something? I don't want to mention the name of the family. He said, I reply in two proverbs. The first proverb of the old proverb of the Arabs is that, بلادي وإن جانت علي عزيزة وأهلي وإن ظنوا علي كرام. My country, even if it's a stranger to me, I will still love my country and respect. That doesn't exist anymore. I said, what's the new one? He said, حينما تنبت العزة ذاك موطني. He's so rich in Saudi Arabia. He said, I don't think of Hadhramaut at all. So
That's precisely what I heard in other parts of the world.
He's replicated all over the world. Where your respect is, that's your country. You are
Sure.
So,
Thank you. I'd like to ask Mr. Bin-Dohry if he has any final thoughts to share with us. I think this has been a rich discussion and sorry?
Is it okay, just 1 minute, people final thought?
Okay, quick question and then a final thought.
Okay, I just want to pull up about it's a good idea for the collective diaspora. But the problem is, as I also researched about Hadhrami also, the problem is among Hadramis themselves, they were involved in conflict, intention, one another. You know, it's just not easy to organize them, to unite them into one voice. It's not easy, because they were also, because of different political
They are all segmented. Students as well as grown-ups. Everybody has got it. Now people are calling for Hadhramaut's independence from both south and from the north to have their own. So we eventually will come out with so many states in Yemen if nothing is done. Then it will be another protracted war going on and on and on from one place to the other. But the best thing is really if we in the diaspora can do something to help locally in Hadhramaut, I think we should go ahead, leave the politicians thrash it out between themselves. That's the best solution, I think. If they see things move in that direction, that those in the diaspora have come here and are doing something better than we could have done, they will accept us at least, even to run their government.
Thank you, Mr. Bin-Dohry. I think it makes a big difference for us, especially in academia, to hear the thoughts of someone who has experienced and actually done things. And I think it gives the discussion a very different tone. And thank you to the audience for your very vigorous participation. And I'm happy to say that that we are able to have members of the Hadhrami diaspora here together who can have differences but can get along and love
I know.
together.
Everywhere I go, I find these differences, and I try to.
Differences are a blessing.
Well, there is a saying that trust. There is a saying in English: trust an Arab to argue. So we always
Thank you.
argue.